joined on the line by Terence Crawford in our next part of our series of sporting icons. Terence Crawford is the current WBO World Welterweight Champion and is an undisputed light welterweight champion, having held the WBA, WBC, IBF and WBO title. Only the fifth fighter and boxer in history to achieve this task. And Terence Crawford, I'm just going to start off the interview by asking this question that I posed to George Foreman, to Roy Jones, to Evander Holyfield, okay? As a young boy growing up, okay, what made you pursue a career in boxing? For George Foreman, growing up, it was on the schoolyard. He was, after a fight, people were saying he was a bit of a bully. Why didn't he become a boxer? Because of that. For Roy Jones, he got fascinated as a young boy watching the Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali fight. And for Evander Holyfield, his reasoning was because where he came from, all he knew was boxing, and boxing enabled him to survive. So, Terence Crawford, how about yourself?
Well, I was always fighting as a young kid. My father fought, my grandfather fought, my uncle fought, so it was just in the family. Growing up, I was a rough kid, and that's all I really knew was fighting. So when I started boxing, I adapted real well with the sport and fell in love with it at an early age.
Yeah, and Terence, doing my bit of research about you, your father was in the Navy, and as you said, in the schoolyard, you were a sort of a feisty young character. But you, lo and behold, you met someone that trained your own father and your uncle, a guy called Carl Washington. And was it the chance meeting of Carl Washington, who was a neighbour? Was he the first real influence in your boxing career and your boxing story?
Well, he was the owner of the gym. He was the one that introduced me to his gym. My father introduced me to boxing. But he introduced me to the actual boxing gym because he was the owner, and he took me to the gym my first time ever going to the gym. And Mitch Minor was a big influence for me in the boxing game because he was my coach, and he was the one that was teaching me the things to do and things not to do.
Yeah, and Terence, you fought 70 official amateur bouts, and you tried out and you missed out. You tried the Olympic trials and you missed out in the 2008 Olympics. And for you at the time, was that a real, growing up as a young boxer, the dream was probably to do the Olympics, then turn professional? Missing out in the Beijing Olympics as a young boxer, coming out, was that a real devastating blow, or was it one of life's hardest lessons that made you even want it even more?
No, being an Olympian was never really my dream or my goals. I always wanted to be a world champion, so when I didn't make the Olympic team, I was sad, I was bummed out, but at the same time, I was so motivated because now I can really start my professional career that I've been wanting to start for years, and strive to be a world champion.
Yeah, and Terence, you made your professional debut on March the 14th, 2008, knocking out Brian Cummins in round 1. And I suppose starting out, you fought an awful lot of amateur fights. You've been boxing since you were as a child, as 7 years old. But that first professional fight, was there a bit of nervous sort of excitement, anticipation, or not knowing what was going to happen before you? Or did you always feel that bit of nervous tension? Or what's your memories of that your first ever professional fight?
Well, I was real excited. My first professional fight, I was real calm, cool, and collect. I went in there, got the job done in 26 seconds. And I just felt comfortable in there.
Yeah, and I suppose, Terence, one thing about great athletes and great sports stars, there always is some sort of an event or a life-changing experience that encounter that sort of sets off a precedent for them to become even better. And for you, 6 months later, after your first professional fight, you encountered a near-death experience, near life-changing experience where the God was on your side when you got actually shot in the head, but somehow God was shining down on you that evening and you managed to walk away from it. And I can only imagine how such a traumatic that experience must have been for you.
Well, it was a eye-opening, but at the same time, I look past that. I'm in a different place in my life right now. And I'm looking towards the future and not the past.
Yeah, and Terence, I suppose then the first you went 19-0, then 15 wins by knockouts, but the first real sort of fight that took prominence and introduced Terence Crawford onto the world stage was that fight with the Colombian Bredes Prescott, unanimous points victory, and this was the first time that you fought a 10-round fight at the 140 limit. So the training and conditioning and the stamina and the preparation for that Bredes Prescott fight, what was your training camp going into that fight like?
Well, it was the same. I always work hard in training camp, and for that fight, we didn't change up anything. We was already scheduled to fight at 135 on the undercard of that same fight card. We got elevated to fight the co-main event with Bredes Prescott at 140, and we took the opportunity. We looked at it as an opportunity, and we took it, and then we looked spectacular in the fight, and my career boosted from there.
Yeah, and I suppose the next fight that I want to bring you on to Terence Crawford, and it was probably Alejandro Sanabria, June the 15th, 2013 in Texas, and it was the manner of the finish that which you took Sanabria out in the 6th round, sort of a deadly sort of a left hook, and that really showcased the finishing power of Terence Crawford.
I really look at it as, I just caught him with a good shot. I always had the finishing punch. If you look at all my prior fights before that fight, I have hurt every single one of my opponents. So I don't think that was an issue at all.
Yeah, and Terence, the next fight then would be, what comes to mind is Andrei Klimov, the WBO ranked 12th. This was a title eliminator fight, and was going into, people were saying this was going to be one of probably your toughest fights, but you won in a unanimous decision over Klimov and inflicted on him his first defeat. And I suppose that was really a sort of marquee sort of fight in relation to propelling your career forward.
Well, that was a good fight. I got criticized a little bit because I was basically outclassing Klimov in the fight, and they wanted to see me press on the gas more and basically get him out of there, and then he couldn't hurt me and I could hurt him. You can see that I could hurt him, but he couldn't hurt me, and they wanted me to press the action and basically finish him off. But in that fight, I felt as if I didn't want to take any chance to hurt my hand or anything in the head, but because I was fighting for the title after that, so I didn't want to risk any injuries and the fight where I already had one.
Yeah, and Terence, this set up then for your first sort of title fight for against Ricky Burns on March the 1st in 2014. And I suppose this was a different scenario for Terence Crawford now. You're not in the USA, you're having to fly into his back garden to take on a world champion in Scotland. And Ricky Burns was the first person to come out and speaking afterwards, the fight down 2 years, said that you totally outclassed him on the night, and that basically he saw a greatness in you after that fight, and he couldn't. The manner of the victory was probably the heaviest defeat Ricky Burns ever took in his life. It was an easy win for you over the 12 rounds.
It was a good fight. I trained extra hard for that fight. That was my first world title fight. I was really up for that fight, and I knew going into the fight that I had to put on a great show and show them that there would be no chance that he can win the fight. If I didn't knock him out, I had to beat him pretty much every round to get a decision in his backyard, and I pretty much did that in the fight.
Yeah, and the next fight, and probably one of the most talked about fights of your career, probably the most viewed fight of your career, whether it be replays or what the time watched online or YouTube, was the cracking fight with Yurikas Gamboa. And this was a thriller, an off the seat sort of an encounter. Gamboa came back, started strong, you came back. It was sort of nip and tuck, but you sort of took over from the middle rounds and you knocked him out 3 times. Gamboa, a Cuban 2004 Olympic gold medalist, and you knocked him down in the 5th, the 8th, and twice in the 9th. And you've said yourself that this was probably one of your toughest fights. Also, it was fought in your hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, and the second ever fight in Omaha since the fight 1972 when Joe Frazier beat Ron Sander. So a great achievement for you, fighting in front of your home people, your home crowd in Omaha, Nebraska, and then to beat a boxer of the caliber of Gamboa, an Olympic gold medalist.
Well, that fight was a great fight. I felt like that fight was the fight that put me on the map as far as the viewers. Everybody that's seen that fight, that's all they ever talk about, is how me and the fight with Gamboa played out. A lot of people doubted me. A lot of people really didn't know who Terence Crawford was. They knew I was a world champion, but they didn't know how talented and how far I can take this boxing to the next level. But yeah, after that fight, it was straight uphill since.
Yeah, and Terence, you didn't go on to become a two-time weight world champion when you beat Thomas Delamore on April 18th, 2015. But I want to skip forward now to the fight on July the 23rd, 2016 versus Victor Postel in Las Vegas. Unification title match. Both fighters, 28 wins, no losses, and someone's W had to go, and for you it was Postel's W went when you scored 2 knockdowns in the 5th round. And what are your memories of that fight with Victor Postel?
Well, that was a fight that everybody was mainly saying this was going to be my toughest fight. This the guy that potentially can beat me. And he's got a good jab. He's tall. He's rangy. Knocked out Lucas Matisse. So I was getting a lot of people praising this guy, but a lot of people wasn't praising me and talking about my jab and my skills and my ability. So I kind of went into that fight with a chip on my shoulder. And when the fight was over, I beat him so easy. A lot of people try to discredit my win by saying he wasn't as good as they thought he was, and this and that and that and this, and I took defense of that.
Yeah, and Terence, in August 19, 2017, then you unified every world title, defeating the WBA IBF champion Julius Indonga, won in Omaha after a third round knockout. And I just watched that back, the fight there today, and you probably an easy win for you, but you'll probably be disappointed in Julius Indonga. You outclassed him from very early on in that fight. It was only going one way.
Huh? You said that again?
No, just Julius Indonga fight. You had outclassed him from very early on in that fight, and you could see it was only going to last the matter of 3 rounds.
That was a fight that, everything was on the line, and all the belts. It was a unification fight. That fight right there, I feel like was one of the biggest fights of my career. And that the accomplishment in that fight, what happened was, bigger than anything that I ever did so far in my career. So going into the fight, we knew he was long. We knew he liked to dart in and out. We knew he liked to wing his shots from wide range, southpaw. We knew everything about this guy going into the fight. And once we got into the fight and the fight started, we already capitalized on every mistake, everything that he would do, because we knew him inside and out. So that what made the fight easy, because of the preparation that we did before the fight, going into the fight.
Yeah, and then on April 21st, 2018, June the 9th actually, 2018, you defeated Jeff Horn via technical knockout in round 9 to become a 3-weight world champion. And this was a very much talked up Jeff Horn, and it was a really good fight, and you really came on strong in the second half of the fight and finished it off in style.
Jeff Horn was a guy that a lot of people was questioning, am I going to be big enough to hold him off, being that he was a rugged, rough type of guy. Pacquiao couldn't hold him up, so what makes people think that I could hold him up? And in that fight, I showed that I was not only big enough, but I was strong enough, and I punched hard enough to actually hold my own in there. So that was another great fight that showed a different side of me that a lot of people didn't know about.
Yeah, and I suppose, Terence, you're in the midst of training. All eyes for you now at the moment are on Amir Khan for April the 20th, 2019. And I suppose, Terence, for you, people have you a raging favourite going into this fight. People will look at Amir Khan and say since 2016, since he's lost to Canelo, he's only been in 2 fights. And when you look at his most iconic sort of victory in Amir Khan, it was back when he beat Marco Antonio Barrera, and that was back in 2010. So Amir Khan's greatest victory, you could say, was back then. I know he's beat Paulie Manalaga and probably an aging Marco Mandaya. So I suppose it's a great opportunity for Amir Khan, but it's one that many people will see that you should be fairly comfortable in.
Well, I look at any fight that I prepare to the best of my abilities, that I'm be comfortable in it, because I do my work before the fight. I don't wait to get to a fight to try to see or want to get comfortable. I always do my work before I get to the fight, so I'll be comfortable in the fight.
Yeah, and I suppose looking ahead at the division, I suppose your name stands out in that division, but also mainly the 4 guys who possibly, in relation to big fights or big sort of showdowns later on in the year, a lot of talked about possible Crawford Errol Spence Jr. fight, a fight maybe with Danny Garcia or a fight with Keith Thurman, and I suppose they're all interesting sort of promising fights that lay in the future. I suppose all fights that Terence Crawford would be eagerly to take part in.
I want all them fights. You know, them the fights that they're calling for. I want to fight the best welterweights available to fight. And if that's what the fans want to see, is me and Errol Spence, and that's the fight everybody want to see, then that's the fight that I want to fight. I want to fight all those top guys in the division.
Yeah, and Terence, one last guy has been mentioned throughout your career, and a few times it came close, but it's never happened. And I suppose it's an aging sort of fighter now in Manny Pacquiao. Many people will feel that maybe the fight could have happened earlier on in Manny, sort of a few years ago when Manny was a bit more in his prime. But are you still open to the possibility of that fight taking place?
You said what?
Are you still open to the possibility in the future of the fight taking place with Manny Pacquiao, or for you is it Danny Garcia, Errol Spence Jr. and Keith Thurman? Are those the fights you want?
Well, if it happen, it happen. If it don't, I'm not basing my career off of Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah. And Terence Crawford, I suppose, what would you like to say to all your international fans and fans here in Ireland that would have seen your fights on pay-per-view and would have seen would have maybe travelled to Scotland to see your victory over Ricky Burns? And in relation to your legacy going forward, what is the aims and ambitions for Terence Crawford when he hangs up his gloves finally, when he can look back on his career? And what would he like to say to his fans in Ireland? And what would Terence Crawford like to be remembered for his boxing career?
Well, I'll be remembered as a fighter that took on all challenges, a fighter that never shied away from a challenge, and not only a talented fighter, but a real legitimate champion that, welcomes everybody.
And Terence, what would you like to say to your fans in Ireland that follow your career?
A lot of my fans in Ireland, April 20th. If you're not coming to the fight, I hope you tune in by the pay-per-view and watch Terence Crawford defend his title at Madison Square Garden against Amir Khan. It's going to be a great night for boxing.
Yeah, and lastly, Terence, the last sentence. I just put this question to George Foreman, I put it to Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield. If you could pick a fighter from any era, any weight class, going back throughout the years, who was probably a hero of yours growing up, what boxer would you like to step inside the ring one-on-one and lace your gloves against? Retired or deceased, or what fighter would that be?
I never thought of that. I was asked that once before, but I never thought of that because those fighters are the ones that paved the way for fighters like myself. So I never thought about, what would a fight be like between us? I never thought about it, so I can't speak on that.
Terence Crawford, it's been a pleasure talking to you on the airways, the current WBO World Welterweight Champion. We encourage all our audience to tune in to watch an eagerly anticipated showdown with Amir Khan on April the 20th. And Terence Crawford, 34 wins, no losses, 25 by knockout. A champion as his 5th fighter ever, only to unify the WBA, WBC, IBF and WBO champions. You probably will go down in legacy and history. And Terence Crawford, still as an active fighter, we wish you all the best in your future endeavours, and I'm sure more championship reigns and belts around your waist. Take care, Terence Crawford.
Thank you.